Shine for a Penny by J.M. Nelson. If someone were to ask me at the time, I would have said that the disappearance of Slow Henry meant anything to me. Yet, as time has passed, since the infamous boy's vanishing, I must say that it was the single most important moment in my life. It opened my eyes to the evils within the world, evils that I thought never existed. A darkness lurks within our world, but most are too blind to see. I moved to the territories in order to make easy money. I will not lie or hide it any further. That was honestly my only motivation. I passed from town to town for a while, selling my novels and stories to the local people. I often told them that I was a hero of the native wars to the north, and they ate it up. I, however, was no real hero, and never served my country as a soldier in any capacity. That said, the majority of people in the territories didn't know any better, and this earned me quite a bit of money. Everyone needs a good story, truth or not. During my quest for fame and wealth, I took residence within the town of Redstone. It was a new town without much wealth. It lived on a massive patch of red dirt that was so sour nothing could grow, aside from trees that bore no fruit. That said, the entirety of the town sat at the base of a mountain. It wasn't really a mountain, it was more of a large hill, but the locals were too stupid to know what real mountains looked like. Regardless, this mountain fed life into the massive forest that surrounded the small, isolated town of Redstone, but not into the town itself. Due to the poor quality of soil, the town was on its last leg, which meant that I did not want to stay very long. Unfortunately, winter came with harsh winds and heavy snow to the small hill town, and I became stranded. I didn't get in a lot of selling that winter. I sold almost the entirety of my collection earlier that fall. Redstone's folk were as stupid as I thought, and purchased as much of my material as they could. With their failing farms, they had nothing more to do. That changed when the snow began to fall. The people became concerned about the missing boy. Slow Henry, named for his lack of a mental capacity, was a young boy that hung around his father's wares store. He gave shoe shines for a penny, and his business was quickly going under because the majority of the people within Redstone didn't have any type of shoe that needed to be polished. Except for me, of course. I probably gave that 5-year-old pale-faced boy a nickel a week, just in order to keep my nicest leather shoes polished in the freezing winter. Slow Henry really was a nice boy. Every time anyone approached, he asked with a soft, sweet voice, "Shine for a penny?" That is all he could really say that I cared to hear. Of course he tried to discuss other matters, but I didn't care to have conversations with him. Everybody mocked the stupidity of the boy, and his father, Howard Howell, took it on the chin as he should have. Nobody wanted a slow boy like Henry to be their only heir in the harsh territory town. However, that's all his foreign wife gave him, and she apologized dearly for it. Slow Henry disappeared on a Wednesday. His mother, Abriana, said she saw the boy leaving to go to his father's shop in the morning. Nobody saw him outside the wares store that day. The slow boy simply vanished into thin air. Now, the majority of people in the town didn't care for Slow Henry at all. Yet the cruelty of people truly reared its ugly head when the boy disappeared, because that's all they could talk about. They, however, were not concerned for the boy, but rather hoped that his father did what was expected of him, and to leave the boy in the forest. A bit barbaric in my time, but some of the old traditional territorial towns had some sort of strange custom, and in Redstone, if someone was deemed undesired, they would be exiled to live amongst the woods. I didn't believe Henry Howell to do that to his slow boy. He, while also being on the dim-witted side, legitimately cared for his son, and every day I could look out my window and see him checking the woods with a dimly lit torch. The boy's father never found a trace of the boy, but he did speak of small bare footprints embedded into the thick snow. But that sounded like lunacy, because with the heavy snowfall each day, they should have been covered. Howard Howell swore them true, but I still didn't believe it. After a week, the people in town began to discuss the possibility of bringing back the old custom of exile. See, the town believed that Abriana abandoned the boy in the woods. Nobody wanted a child like Slow Henry, and to these people, it made the most sense to just abandon the unwanted. They at first praised Howard Howell's foreign wife for her deed. She never admitted it, and in fact wept uncontrollably at the thought of doing such an evil thing. That turned the town on her quickly, and they, reverting back to their old-fashioned ways, sent her off into the woods, banished forever. They, liking what Howard Howell brought to their society, left him be to run his store, alone and without an heir. Abriana Howell never came to be banished, though. By morning, when the townsfolk showed up to do their deed, she had vanished into the night. I had heard nothing that evening. I saw nothing but frost in the twilight. The townsfolk found it strange, very strange. Not because of how the woman vanished just like her boy, but that her footprints led off into the surrounding forest towards the mountain. Even with the heavy snowfall, her tracks were not covered. Small, strange indentations in the snow led her tracks, as if there were some sort of post she used to help her walk. Still, the townspeople didn't care. They were happy that Slow Henry and his mother would no longer be considered a bother. It was then that I had to reap what I'd sowed. Howard Howell, one of my most endearing and trusting customers, came to me with a proposition. He begged me to find his son and wife. He, knowing that he did not exile his son, and feeling guilty about his wife being forced to leave, wanted me to use my old fictitious tracking skills to find them. I declined, naturally. He spoke of my grand deeds fighting and tracking the natives during the Northern Wars, and, as proud of a man that I am, did not deny that the stories I sold him were false. This only furthered the broken man's begging, saying that I was the only man from Redstone to Wichita that could possibly help them in finding Slow Henry and his mother. After swearing that I no longer adventured, and that I was a retired soldier, Howell continued to beg. It was only after I absolutely told him no, and that there'd be no way I could help him, he called me a coward. A liar I was. I knew that, and I was honest to myself about it. However, I hated being called a coward. Nobody wanted to buy lies from a coward. My reputation was at stake. It was in that moment that a plan came to me. I would wander the forest alone for a few days, but would return to the town of Redstone with no trace of the boy and the mother, but tell Howard Howell that I found them, murdered by the natives or some other foe that seemed believable. I didn't think it would take much effort in the story because, well, Howard struck me as gullible. He would pay and I could be happy. He'd be able to move on without his slow heir and foreign wife. He, unfortunately, would probably be miserable, but I didn't really care much about that. Still, the opportunity presented itself. I would take it for my own, and Howell would have some sort of answers to what happened to his family. I would be at ease and could move on once winter ended, with my reputation intact. I accepted his mission to go and find the Slow boy and the Howell wife, yet my plan was hurt from the start. Word of my quest filled the town, and struck quite the jolly with a few of the residents. They found it funny that Howard Howell cared so much for his family, as undesired as they were by the rest. Yet, some believed that I was off to do something else, something secret. This invited a few people to ask me what my true business was, but I told them flat out that I searched for Slow Henry and his mother. Still, they didn't believe my honesty, something they would regret later. I had a man, whose name I cannot remember, ask me to take his farmhand on my journey. They told me that he would be of good service, saying that he knew more of the area than anyone else. I found that strange, but upon seeing him I knew why. He was at least half native, or at least a foreign type of some kind. Nobody wanted to fess up who his father was. His mother died during birth. I felt slightly sorry for the boy, whom they called Fields. He was no older than 16 and had the darkest hair that I'd ever seen. I refused his services at first, but the farmer, with a few pieces of coin, persuaded me that if the farmhand were to never return, that the town could be much better off. I thought to myself that losing the poor bastard Fields in the forest would sell a better story in the future, so I allowed him to come along. Howell rode south on his own adventure to find his wife and son. He left around midday. I took my time gathering what I thought I'd need. I took a stage pistol, one that didn't fire. I wore it on my person from time to time in order to sell the warrior appeal. I also took an old cavalry sword that I had purchased years back. I never took care of the damn thing. It mostly collected rust and dust inside my wardrobe. It wouldn't do anything or anyone harm, unless I hacked away at them for hours. Still, when I exited my apartment draped in faded tattered blues, with an old cavalry sword and a pistol, I knew that I looked as heroic as I had imagined I did within my own novels. Fields and I entered into the woods near nightfall. I assumed that it was close to 4 o'clock, but with the thick dark clouds overhead and the heavy snowfall, it became very difficult to tell. We didn't trek far that first night as planned. We made a small camp with a fire. The two of us didn't speak to one another, mostly because Fields was a mute, so I believed. He didn't say a single word to me since meeting him, and I didn't bother to speak to him at all. I thought it would be a boring conversation. In the morning we broke the camp down and began our trek closer to the mountain. I didn't want to keep going, but if I was going to sell that I went to the mountain, I would need a decent amount of time spent in the woods, so why not explore to kill time? I also didn't want Fields to get the wrong impression, not that he would tell on me anyway. We didn't get very far before we began finding peculiar things among the snow-swept forest. Small child-sized footprints walked in circles amongst the trees. They were not alone, though. It appeared as if the child, who I instantly assumed to be Slow Henry, walked with 2 walking sticks. I'd heard of contraptions like that before, mostly used way north in thick snow for traction. Yet those who used such walking sticks often wore special shoes. Snowshoes, I believe, is what they called them. Slow Henry walked barefoot. The tracks appeared to be fresh, and I really thought for a good moment that I might actually have found the boy and really become a hero. That faded soon as I saw the tracks, which wandered in circles between the trees, breaking away from our location, and marched towards the mountain. I didn't want to go. I stayed still. I couldn't have cared less about the slow boy. Fields, though, he marched after the tracks with great haste. To not be seen as a coward, I followed after him. The tracks faded away after some time. The snow became deeper, past the ankle, and the tracks looked lighter until they were non-existent. We followed them for hours and the sun was setting yet again. We made another camp and another fire, waiting till morning. I didn't plan on marching further into the woods. Come morning I planned on leaving Fields, and if he resisted, I'd murder the bastard boy. I wasn't proud of the thought, but it had to be done in order to earn a little extra money. That night a cold wind blew our tent away. Fields and myself laid on the ground, covered in our blankets and furs as a heavy blizzard roared around us. Neither of us could see past an arm's length of where we slept. The bastard mute seemed frightened. I wasn't. I figured it to be a bad form of weather and an unlucky misfortune that we'd have to deal with. I told myself I just had to survive the night and everything would be just fine. Oh, how I lied to myself. On the back of the bone-chilling wind, a soft voice spoke to the two of us. Do you see us as weak? I spoke to Fields for the first time. What did you say? He obviously didn't respond. The voice came again. Weak we are no longer. You wanted better. We are better. I peered out into the snowy void that surrounded us. I couldn't see anything at first. The snow fell hard, leaving white streaks all across the darkened air around the bastard and me. I watched as Fields stood. He kept one of the furs draped over his shoulders as he took a step away into the snowy darkness. He looked back at me, wide-eyed and scared. I stood too, trying to see what startled him so. In the distance, ever so slightly, 8 small orbs glowed amongst the darkness. We could see them faintly. I didn't know what they were exactly, but I didn't like it. We are better. In an instant, they disappeared, and the mute and myself were left alone in the darkness. When morning came, I woke alone. Fields vanished into the night. His portion of furs and blankets he took with him, and I, feeling a sense of relief, smiled at the thought of not having to kill the bastard. I gathered my things. 2 things of importance appeared to be taken by Fields. My stage pistol and the rusted sword. I didn't care. I wanted to leave. Bastard would soon find that they didn't work, and for all I knew, whatever came in the late watches took him. In the process of packing, I discovered his footprints in the snow. They, like the child footprints we'd seen earlier, and those of Abriana's, appeared to be untouched by the blizzard the night before. The prints marched around the camp in an unusual fashion. There wasn't a rhyme or reason, and at times, just by trying to see what the boy was up to, I could not place the prints together. They were so sporadic and random. I didn't know what it was all about, but I knew that I didn't want to stick around any longer. I conjured up a story, as any great writer does, that basically covered why I lost my weapons and the bastard. I planned on sticking to my original story of finding the boy and his mother, but the natives killed them. The townsfolk wouldn't care, neither would his former employer. Only Howard Howell would give a damn, and he'd be gullible enough to believe it. Just as I left the campsite, I took one final look to make sure I gathered everything. I noticed that the prints, while still all over the place and unreadable at times, marched in a strange fashion away from the camp towards the mountain. I could see it through the trees, tall and looming, the clouds of winter wrapped around its curved summit. I stared up at it, in awe of its majestic beauty. I thought for a moment to continue my journey, and maybe, just maybe, I'd find something worthwhile atop that massive structure. Reality hit me swiftly. The boy disappeared. His mother disappeared. The bastard disappeared. All heading to the mountain. I knew better. There would be a trek for better men, men of which I impersonated. I turned my back, marching back the way I came, to lie to the residents of Redstone. The snow didn't fall at all that morning, or even that afternoon. I moved south, following my natural sense of direction. I couldn't help but shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It's difficult to describe, but I just felt like those orbs from the night before marched behind me, watching every move I made. A sense of paranoia crept into my mind. The dense fog that slithered between the trees did not help. It wasn't far past midday, but it felt as if it were almost nightfall. I kept moving, not wanting to stay in the forest for much longer. I feared for what would come for me. I wondered what took the boy. I honestly didn't believe him to be exiled or discarded by his mother. I never really bought that story to begin with. Many unnatural things lurk within the forests, and many phenomena happen that cannot be explained. I assumed that the disappearances fell into that category, but my mind still wondered, as all do. It was in that moment of reflection and thought that I stumbled across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. I noticed my own footprints. They were fading amongst the snow. I could tell they were mine by sticking my foot next to them, realizing they were the same size and the same impression as my boots. I knew in that moment that I walked in circles. However, mixed among my prints were those of the child and the strange peg imprints that extended out before them. I knelt down, examining the indentations in the snow. They were the same as before. No difference could be seen. They were laid directly behind mine, following and watching. I knew in an instant that my paranoia was granted. I turned quickly, trying to see if I could catch the boy following. I couldn't see anything amongst the fog at first. I stood, raising up and squinting my eyes into the cold, dark forest. Then, slowly, the glowing orbs from the previous night began to glow amongst the fog. I heard a voice carry itself forward, directly towards me. It asked, "Shine for a penny?" The voice, although I knew it to be that of Slow Henry, did not sound like the boy. Instead, it was corrupted, warped with age and pain. It sounded hollow, as if whoever possessed it was nothing but a shell. I asked aloud, "What did you say?" "Shine for a penny." My body screamed at me to run, but my mind told me to stay and wait. It was foolish of me, I'm aware of that. I just had to know what the boy was up to. I had to know what those orbs were. Slowly, whatever followed me crept closer. The orbs grew in size. The fog, still wrapped around whatever it was, seemed to thin. I could see a large, hulking silhouette of a figure. Then, coming from the shadows of the fog, two long, arachnid-like legs stretched outward, stabbing into the snow. I could see, vaguely, underneath the hulking mass, two small bare feet stepping into the frost-covered ground. As the front of the creature emerged from the fog, I could see him, Slow Henry. His body dangled in front of the hulking mass, the orbs glowing from the mass itself. His head tilted to the left, lifeless and emotionless. His torso was still, as were his arms that dangled forward from the creature. His legs, though, they marched in rhythm with the strange arachnid limbs that stretched outwards from the boy's back. While the boy looked to be dead, the voice still came from his mouth. "Shine for a penny." I didn't care to see more. I ran away. I'm not ashamed to say it. Being confronted with a hideous creature is something that only true heroes face. And I, a liar, wanted no part of whatever I looked at. I dashed into the thick fog, not really paying attention to which way I ran. In a few moments, I knew that I was lost, and that was the last thing that I needed at this point in time. The fog seemed to intensify, and the chilled air grew colder. My face felt numb as I stumbled between the thick forest trees, trying to stay on my feet to keep running. My heart felt as if it were going to burst through my chest. I thought, in that moment, I would never make it out of the forest alive. I stopped running, not because I accepted my fate, but ahead of me, not too far in the distance, I could see the silhouette of a man. I called out for help. They didn't respond. I shouted that there was some sort of beast after me. Still, they didn't respond. I approached slowly, nervous that it was a trick of whatever chased me. Yet soon, I realized that it was not a play on my eyes. Rather, the bastard field stood alone amongst the snow-covered trees. I ran to him. The boy's back was turned to me, and he stared ahead, looking off into the dense fog at something. I wondered if the beast was after him too. I shouted at him continuously to run, but he didn't hear me. I mocked him for being deaf and dumb. As I came to him, I grabbed a hold of his arm and swung him around. The boy's face, once tan and kissed by the sun, was as pale as the snow around us. His eyes were faded, as if he'd become blind somehow. His nose bled in a small continuous river into his wide-open mouth. I asked what was wrong with him, but the mute said nothing. He stared at me with those milky eyes and with that wide-open mouth. Then I felt a force rise up within him, and a deep haunting howl came from the back of his throat. It roared throughout the forest, shaking the trees free of their snow-capped limbs. I fell backwards in fear, trying to crawl away. The bastard's head turned to me, staring at me. His mouth remained open, but his jaw rolled in his sockets, as if he wanted to say something, but the roar is all that came out. Then, without hesitation, the boy went limp. He collapsed forward onto his knees. His head fell forward, lifeless. He groaned in pain. It was the first thing I heard from him that sounded human. I tried to stand, but I felt my legs turn into a jelly out of nervous fear. I slid backwards in the snow, resting against a tree. I wrapped my hands around the gnarled trunk in order to give myself some leverage to stand. All the while the bastard groaned in pain. A sound followed. I at first believed it to be the sound of branches breaking. I looked above, seeing if a beast lurked within the trees. Then it hit me. They were not branches, but bones. I turned slowly, glaring at the bastard fields. He stayed hunched over on his knees. His head remained tilted downward as if all life faded. His groaning continued on a perpetual loop. However, his back split at the spine, opening his rib cage in the most unnatural fashion. Amongst the blood and gore that followed from his body, a hulking, terrifying mass slid from his massive back wound. It was not large at first, but as the creature slid from the boy, it grew in size as it hit the cold winter air. I watched in horror as two slender arachnid legs shot out from the bastard shoulder blades, stabbing into the ground to his front. Slowly the boy's body rose off the ground, and his legs appeared to find strength, helping the heavy mass of the creature find balance. 8 glowing eyes opened atop the mass that rested behind the boy's neck. They looked in my direction. The boy continued to groan in pain, but I knew him to be dead. I found my courage as I stared at the beast and decided to run. As I turned from the tree, ready to dash off into the woods yet again, the dangling corpse of Slow Henry halted my path. The beast that controlled it glared at me with those bright glowing orbs. I stared at the cold dead face of the missing child, and it asked, "Shine for a penny." I backed away slowly, avoiding both of the monstrous creatures. Another voice came from behind me. "Henry." I turned, seeing the dangling body of Abriana. Her face was twisted and contorted in an unnatural way. She too hung from the body of a hulking entity, which I had no name for. Her spider legs lunged towards me, causing me to fall backwards. Her body swayed in the cool breeze that rolled between the trees, peppering the beasts that surrounded me with the harsh snowfall. The glowing orbs of each being stared down at me as I laid between the three of them. They formed a triangle around me, just watching me. They each continued their groaning, asking for a penny and calling out for their son. I knew the people to be dead, but their voices, while hollow and ancient, played their last phrase on a loop, which made me hope that somehow I stared at a living creature. A voice spoke over those of the dead. It sounded soft, like a raspy whisper, familiar to the one that spoke to me and the bastard the night before. It echoed from Slow Henry. It asked, "You are not one of the undesired. What are you doing here?" I didn't respond. "Speak." "I came searching for you," I stammered. I turned to the corpse of Adriana. "And you as well." "Do you know my name?" Slow Henry asked. I nodded. "Henry Howell." "That was his name. Do you know what we are?" I shook my head. "The people of Redstone no longer wanted them. We embraced them. We have decided the time is right." "I understand," I lied, trying to avoid any potential danger. "Do you, false man?" "False?" I questioned. "You built your life on lies. It takes less than 8 eyes to see such a thing." As I was about to respond, I could see more figures emerging from the fog. 16, maybe more, emerged, all hulking monsters like the 3 that surrounded me. Each of them wore a corpse for a mask. Each of the bodies spoke in a rhythm of their last words. "They see you as the truth?" I questioned. "I don't know what you mean." "They buy your lies. We have no need for them here." "I will be on my way then," I told them. "They created us." "Who?" "Your buyers," a voice echoed from the bastard. Slow Henry spoke again. "They cannot shun forever. Exiles find a way to return." "Return then," I told the creatures, watching as the other beasts leered at me from the thick fog. "I'm moving on after winter. I want no part of this." "They must accept. They must accept their creations." "Accept?" I questioned. "Tell them to accept, false man. They buy your lies. Will they buy your truth?" "If I tell them, will you let me live?" "We want nothing of you except your word, false man. We want Redstone to repent for what they've created." "I will tell them to do so." "Tell them to accept." "Accept what? I don't get what you want from me, beast." As I let my anger slip out of me, Slow Henry's puppet master reared upward and let out a haunting roar, one that I thought would make me deaf. I fell to my knees, staring up at it and begging for my life. "We are your kith, false man. Do not strain that trust, or we too will find a place for you amongst us." "I meant no offense," I told the creature. "The lies must stop." I nodded. "Tell them to accept." "And if they don't listen? If they don't believe?" "They must repent then." The beast of Slow Henry moved closer to me, waving the corpse of the dead child above my head as those glowing orbs stared down at me. I lowered my head as if I were bowing to the monster. The voices of the dead continued the perpetuating chants, yet they sounded as if they were fading. I glanced upward, seeing that there were no beasts around me any longer. All that remained were the strange patterns of footprints. I sat in the forest for a good while, alone and crying. The cooler airs of night rolled in as darkness completely enveloped the sky. I didn't know what I witnessed, but I had to warn Redstone. I could have tried harder, looking back on it. I did warn the town, though. I ran through the single street, raving like a madman, telling the folk to repent and accept. They had no idea what I spoke of, but I said it to them many times. I continued to repeat it, even to myself as I gathered my belongings from my apartment. Nobody dared to speak to me. Nobody wanted to try and understand what I told them. That would be their fault. The monsters were coming, and I wanted to be as far away from Redstone as possible. I didn't bother to get my payment. I didn't speak to the farmer or Howard Howell. I simply got on my horse and left. On my way out, I shouted, "Accept! Accept! Accept!" That was the last time I ever saw the town. As I write this note, Redstone is gone. It is as if the town never existed within the territories, and never has. It has been wiped away from all records and all knowledge of the surrounding townships. When I mention those monsters to people, when I mention Slow Henry, his mother, the bastard, and those who were exiled, I get blank stares and in some cases, laughed out of a room. Nobody remembers the tradition of exile in territorial towns. They think of me crazy. Yet here I sit, writing my final story, one that I did not build off of lies. It, as told, is the truth. My so-called kith, created in the woods, took their revenge on Redstone, or so I believe, wiping it out of existence. I wonder if those beasts still lurk within those forests. I wonder if they made a lair within that mountain. I wish that those who read this take heed, for what is created is not what is always intended. Listen, I tell an honest tale. Believe me, even though I am nothing but a liar.